That's it. Everybody out of the office.
What? You heard the man. Everybody out. Scoot.
You too, Dennis.
What?
There was a time in TV land when being a boss meant you could yell in a crowded room, make your employees run personal errands, flirt in the workplace like it was a company benefit, and still get a heartwarming group hug before the credits rolled. The laugh track would kick in, someone would shrug, and the episode would end with the moral. Well, that was wacky. Today you'd get an email titled Quick Chat, and it would not, in fact, be quick. Because modern workplaces run on things the 80s and 90s sitcom universe didn't believe in, like HR, boundaries, documentation, and the terrifying power of a coworker who knows how to screenshot. A lot of these classic TV bosses didn't just cross the line, they used it as a jump rope. So let's take a nostalgic stroll through 9 sitcom bosses who were hilarious on screen, but would be absolutely speedrunning unemployment in 2025. We're counting down from 9 to 1, and the rules are simple. If their leadership style involves intimidation, favoritism, workplace romance roulette, or treating employees like emotional support animals, they're on the list. All right, dust off the shoulder pads, hide the office fax machine, and get ready to watch HR's worst nightmares come to life. 9. Mr. Wick, The Drew Carey Show. Mr. Wick is the kind of boss who doesn't manage a workplace. He manages a pressure cooker. He's not interested in coaching, mentoring, or building a supportive environment. His leadership philosophy is simple. Keep everyone slightly terrified at all times and call it productivity. In the 90s sitcom logic, Wick works because he's an over-the-top villain. He storms in, he glares, he shreds morale like it's part of the job description, and somehow the office still functions because the show needs it to. But in a modern workplace, Wick wouldn't just be tough. He'd be the reason people update LinkedIn during lunch. The biggest issue is how personal it gets. Wick doesn't correct mistakes. He makes them feel like character flaws. He humiliates, intimidates, and creates an atmosphere where everyone is bracing for impact. And that constant tension isn't high standards. It's a hostile work environment with a tie on. What makes Wick especially fireable today is that he treats fear like a management tool. Modern companies, at least the ones trying to avoid lawsuits, know that intimidation doesn't build better employees. It builds burnout, turnover, and that one brave coworker who finally reports everything. In the sitcom world, Wick is a funny obstacle. In real life, Wick is a manager who gets pulled into a meeting, gets placed on leave pending investigation, and returns exactly never. And the wild part? Wick isn't even the most exhausting boss on this list. Not even close. 8. Mr. Pitt, Seinfeld. Mr. Pitt isn't a boss so much as he's a walking reminder that some people should not be given authority over other humans. He has the vibe of a wealthy toddler who learned the word assistant and never looked back. Elaine's job with Mr. Pitt isn't really a job. It's a constant stream of bizarre, petty demands delivered with total sincerity. Like he's running a high-stakes operation instead of obsessing over socks and tiny preferences. And yes, it's funny. Because it's Seinfeld, and the whole point is that adult life is ridiculous. But in a modern workplace, this is a case study in misuse of power. The problem isn't just the weird requests. It's how he treats Elaine like her time, skills, and dignity belong to him. He doesn't assign tasks. He issues commands. He doesn't collaborate. He controls. And he has no interest in boundaries, because boundaries would interfere with his ongoing mission to turn normal life into a nightmare scavenger hunt. Micromanagement is one thing. Mr. Pitt takes it to a level where the employee is basically a human remote control. Do this. Fix that. No, not like that. Why is this not perfect? Why are you not reading my mind? It's emotional labor dressed up as employment. Today, that kind of behavior gets you flagged fast because it creates stress, resentment, and a workplace culture where one person's whims become everyone's emergency. Mr. Pitt would be the reason HR starts using phrases like unreasonable expectations and pattern of demeaning behavior. In the show, Elaine survives because she's Elaine. In real life, she'd be gone in 2 weeks. Either she quits, or Mr. Pitt gets told gently that assistants are not legally required to tolerate a sock-based reign of terror. Number 7. Jimmy James, NewsRadio. Jimmy James is what happens when you put a lovable tornado in charge of a business. He's charming, unpredictable, and wildly confident, often in direct proportion to how little sense he's making. In a sitcom, that's gold. In an actual company, that's a liability with a corner office. Jimmy's biggest fireable today trait is his total commitment to whim-based leadership. He doesn't run a company so much as he vibes at it. One day he's inspired by a random idea. The next day, he's forcing everyone to rearrange their lives because he had a thought during breakfast. His employees aren't working under a strategy. They're working under the weather. And sure, he's not malicious like some bosses. He doesn't wake up thinking, how can I ruin everyone's day? He wakes up thinking, what if we do something insane? And then everyone else has to carry that insanity on their backs while smiling. Modern workplaces require some baseline stability. Policies, consistency, accountability. Jimmy treats those like optional accessories. And the thing about an erratic boss is that even when they mean well, they create chaos. Shifting priorities, unclear expectations, wasted time, and a permanent state of confusion. Employees can't plan. Teams can't execute. Everything becomes reactionary. Today, Jimmy would be the CEO who gets quietly boxed in by a board, assigned an operations partner, and encouraged to focus on vision while adults handle the decisions. Because at a certain point, quirky stops being quirky and starts being expensive. In NewsRadio, his randomness creates hilarious storylines. In real life, it creates a workplace where nobody knows what matters. Everyone's stressed, and the top performer leaves because they're tired of being managed by a coin flip. 6. Jack Gallow, Just Shoot Me. Jack Gallow is the classic sitcom boss who thinks being the boss means being the loudest person in the room. He's charismatic, he's vain, and he treats the workplace like it's a stage where everyone else exists to react to him. In the 90s, this brand of boss was a comedy staple. The egomaniac who says the wrong thing, blunders into awkward situations, and somehow still runs the place. But in a modern office, Jack's whole vibe would trigger an HR training video within 10 minutes. The main issue is boundaries. Jack treats boundaries like suggestions. He's overly involved in people's personal business. He's casually inappropriate. And he talks to employees in ways that would absolutely not fly today. A lot of his humor is based on him being blunt, insensitive, or flirtatious in a way that's supposed to read as roguish. In 2025, roguish gets you reported. Then there's the leadership problem. Jack runs on impulse and ego. Decisions aren't necessarily about what's best for the company. They're about what's best for Jack's image, Jack's mood, or Jack's moment. That means favoritism, inconsistent standards, and the kind of workplace culture where everyone learns to manage the boss instead of doing their jobs. Jack also creates that toxic sitcom workplace dynamic where employees are constantly put in uncomfortable situations, and the solution is usually a joke and a reset button. Real workplaces don't reset. People remember. People document. People talk. In the show, Jack's flaws are softened by the ensemble and the comedy. In real life, he's the boss who gets pulled aside after the third complaint and told, "This is not a family. This is a workplace. Please act like it." Number 5. Maxwell Sheffield, The Nanny. Maxwell Sheffield is the rare sitcom boss who would be fired today for reasons that are, honestly, pretty romantic, but still very illegal in a corporate sense. Because Maxwell doesn't just hire Fran. He hires a whirlwind of chemistry into his household, and then slowly turns employee into love interest, while everyone else just kind of watches it happen. And look, in sitcom land, it's adorable. The whole show is built on the tension between professional and personal, and Maxwell is portrayed as a decent guy who's trying to do the right thing while obviously falling for the nanny he employs. But if you yank that into a modern HR context, you can practically hear the alarm bells. This is the textbook issue, a power imbalance. Maxwell controls Fran's paycheck, her role, her living situation, and her job security. Even if the feelings are mutual, the relationship is still complicated by authority. In a modern workplace, that's a conflict of interest so big it needs its own zip code. And it's not just the romance. The entire setup is blurry. Work hours blend into family life. Job expectations mix with emotional attachment. And the boss role is constantly muddied by personal stakes. In a typical company, HR would step in immediately and restructure reporting lines at minimum, if not recommend termination for violating policy. The reason Maxwell lands on this list isn't because he's cruel or toxic. It's because the situation is fundamentally inappropriate by modern standards. Today, a boss who dates an employee, especially one who lives in the boss's home, creates a minefield of legal and ethical problems. In sitcom form, it's a slow burn love story. In real life, it's an HR case file labeled, "Please do not do this again." Number 4, Sam Malone, Cheers. Sam Malone is a great sitcom character and a genuinely entertaining mess of a human being. But as a boss, Sam is the kind of manager who would get a mandatory leadership coaching email before the second commercial break. Sam owns the bar. That means he sets the tone, establishes the culture, and is responsible for how people behave in that workplace. And the Cheers workplace culture, while iconic, is basically a museum exhibit called Boundaries, missing since 1982. Sam's biggest modern problem is how deeply his personal life bleeds into the job. His flirtation is constant, his romantic entanglements are frequent, and the bar often feels like it's being run on vibes, attraction, and unresolved tension. In a modern setting, the boss being romantically involved with staff, or creating an environment where that kind of dynamic feels normal, would raise huge red flags. Then, there's the issue of favoritism and blurred authority. When your boss is also your buddy, your therapist, your ex, and the guy making decisions about your schedule, that's not charming. That's chaos. And chaos is fun in a sitcom because it creates story. In real life, chaos is the reason people don't feel safe, don't feel respected, and don't know where they stand. Sam also manages with a loose approach that can easily slide into negligence. A modern business owner can't just shrug and let the workplace become a social ecosystem where employees are constantly navigating awkward dynamics. The environment has to be professional enough that people can do their jobs without being pulled into the boss's personal drama. In Cheers, Sam's flaws are part of the charm. In real life, Sam gets a complaint, then another, then an investigation, and then he's told, politely, that running a workplace like a dating pool is not actually a valid business model. Number 3, Mr. Burns, The Simpsons. Mr. Burns is the easiest entry on the list because he's essentially a walking "do not do this" poster for management. The only reason Burns survives as a boss is because he's in a cartoon universe where consequences bounce off like rubber. Burns represents the exaggerated extreme of corporate cruelty, the boss who views employees as replaceable, disposable, and, on his best days, mildly visible. He underpays, intimidates, manipulates, and generally runs his operation like a villain auditioning for a lifetime appointment as most hated man. In a modern context, Burns wouldn't just be fired, he'd be investigated from multiple directions. Labor violations? Yes. Unsafe conditions? Probably daily. Harassment and intimidation? Absolutely. Ethics issues? Burns treats ethics like a personal enemy. What makes Burns fired today isn't just that he's mean. It's that he embodies a leadership style based entirely on power, without responsibility. He doesn't build. He exploits. He doesn't lead. He controls. In modern workplaces, again, the ones trying to stay functional and out of court can't operate under that model anymore. Even if you ignore the most outrageous cartoon antics, Burns' baseline behavior is enough. He rules by fear. He makes decisions purely to benefit himself. He views human needs as inconveniences, and that creates an environment where no one thrives. People just survive. In The Simpsons, Burns is hilarious because he's so over the top that you can laugh at the absurdity. In real life, he's the boss whose company becomes a documentary with ominous music and a title like The Man Who Treated Employees Like Furniture. Burns wouldn't be getting coached. He'd be getting escorted. Number 2, Mayor Randall Winston, Spin City. Mayor Winston is the kind of boss who would absolutely be described in a modern workplace review as high risk. In Spin City, he's funny because he's a political disaster machine with a grin. In real life, he's the reason an entire staff would develop a twitch. The biggest issue with Winston is that he's constantly creating problems that his employees have to fix, often problems caused by poor judgment, impulsive behavior, or the inability to think 2 steps ahead. He's not a leader who steadies the ship. He's the guy drilling holes in it and asking the crew to make it work. And because he's the mayor, his position comes with power, visibility, and a huge responsibility to behave like an adult. Instead, he treats the office like a playground and leaves his staff to manage his image, clean up his messes, and protect him from the consequences of his own decisions. In modern terms, Winston is a walking ethics crisis. Even when he's not intentionally corrupt, he creates an environment where staff are constantly pressured into damage control. That kind of workplace breeds burnout, stress, and the sense that the only job is protect the boss. There's also the issue of accountability. Winston often behaves like he's insulated from consequences because he's charming. In real workplaces, especially public ones, charm doesn't stop investigations, journalists, or oversight committees. A boss who repeatedly puts the organization at risk becomes an organizational liability. Spin City turns that into comedy. The staff scrambling, the frantic cover-ups, the clever fixes. But if you translate that into today's reality, it's a nightmare. Winston would be the boss who trends on social media for the wrong reason and then asks his team, "Can we make this go away?" And the answer in 2025 is usually, "No, sir. And also, please hand over your badge." 1. Buck Strickland, King of the Hill. Buck Strickland is the type of boss who doesn't just blur professional boundaries. He drives over them, backs up, and asks the employee to pay for the damage. He's charming in a greasy salesman way, but his entire management style is basically, "Hank, handle it." Buck isn't a leader. He's a walking delegation of responsibility without authority. He dumps problems on his employees, avoids accountability, and coasts on the fact that someone like Hank Hill exists, an employee so loyal he'll mop up the boss's messes like it's part of the uniform. In a modern workplace, Buck's behavior would be fireable for multiple reasons, but the biggest is how he repeatedly puts employees in unfair positions. He makes questionable decisions, flirts with unethical behavior, and treats the business like a personal playground. Then, when consequences appear, he expects Hank to solve them while Buck maintains his ego and his comfort. That's a classic toxic dynamic. The boss who benefits from everyone else's competence and sacrifices while offering little support, stability, or respect in return. Buck doesn't build his team. He uses his team. And he especially uses Hank, not just for labor, but as a moral shield. Today, Buck would also be a nightmare for company ethics. Even if you don't pin specific crimes on him, he has that constant reputational risk energy. You can't run a business when the boss is always one bad decision away from turning the workplace into a crisis. In King of the Hill, Buck is funny because Hank's frustration is relatable and Buck's antics are exaggerated. In real life, Buck is the boss who gets audited, investigated, or sued, and then acts shocked that actions have consequences. Buck Strickland wouldn't be asked to improve. He'd be replaced, and Hank would finally get a weekend. Conclusion. The thing about 80s and 90s sitcom bosses is that they were designed to be entertaining obstacles, not realistic managers. They were exaggerations, big personalities, big flaws, big punchlines. And it worked because the shows weren't trying to model healthy workplaces. They were trying to make you laugh. But rewatch them now, and it's impossible not to hear the modern subtext. This would be a meeting. This would be an email. This would be a formal complaint. This would be someone quietly packing a box while HR stands nearby like a bouncer. And honestly, that's part of the fun. It's like looking at an old TV universe where the rules were different, where outrageous bosses could survive because everything reset next episode. Real life doesn't reset. Real life keeps receipts. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these bosses would you survive the longest working for? And which one gets you to quit by lunch on day one? Drop your pick in the comments. And if there's a sitcom boss I missed who'd be absolutely cooked in today's workplace, tell me, because I'm betting the list is longer than a mandatory HR training slideshow. And remember, if your boss ever says, "Relax, it's just a joke," you may be living in a sitcom. And that's not a compliment anymore.